question that you had put up in one of the chats, and I said, why don't you come in? Let's just discuss it. So that was how it all started. So thank you very much. Of course, you are going to tell us about yourself, but you'll have to, after that, give me 30 seconds to talk about how to find information about the work that I do. I'll do that after that. So please, Delcy, a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Vikram. It's indeed, it was a sort of not very planned, my intervention, but I was interested in listening to some of the activities that you have been doing lately, and I found it, quite engaging. So thanks for all, first of all, for the invitation. Just briefly about me. Of course, I am in love with mediation. I am a lawyer. I have been a lawyer for many, many years now, and specialized in international trade law. But somewhere along the line, I found mediation and trained as a co-mediator in Australia in 1994. And since then, I have gradually become a full-time mediator. And of course, on those days, when you mention mediation, people will not necessarily understand what it was about. And even as an anecdote, one of my first clients made an appointment. And when she came, I saw that she was quite using quite comfortable clothes. And everybody's free to dress how they want. And then she said to me, will this be a strictly 1 hour appointment? And I said, well, let's see how we go. But yes, of course, however time it is required. And as we were going into the office, she started taking off her shoes. And so I realized maybe something was lost in translation. And then she said to me, I have done meditation only a couple of times. So there was obviously a confusion there. But just to say that, of course, mediation as we know it today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the need of legislation or not. But on those days, it was not very well understood. And I find it now quite exciting that after the Singapore Convention has been signed by many countries, now we are all in this journey of sharing the benefits of this process. So I don't think I've said much about me, more about mediation.
I know we have to hear something about you, because you're also going to tell us about this logo that you have at the back, what the significance of that logo is. Looks interesting. So please.
Sure. So I'm just going to probably go a little bit. It's the Australasian Dispute Resolution Center, which I founded and started with two of my very best colleagues in 2014. And it has been a vehicle to promote mediation, especially in the region, in Asia. I am based in Canberra, so I'm talking to you from a very cold afternoon in Canberra. It's raining outside. Wow. So we initially started doing this promotion of mediation in Asia, in our region. And then, of course, it grew to my area of birth in Peru. So we have been working in Latin America, especially in Chile and Peru. And of course, in the region, in most countries, we've done something about mediation. I obviously live in Canberra. I'm based in Canberra, but due to my job now, I travel frequently around the world. And it is quite a satisfying career. Not an easy transition if you are a lawyer to be a mediator, as you probably agree.
It's the mindset. It's the mindset. It's all the mindset. When you can actually start doing things which your mind tells you to do, that's when you get into mediation. But what I'm going to do here is also, Delcy, what you're going to do is, because you've got this Latin American experience, maybe you can take us through legislation in other parts, Peru or Chile and all, because Chile, there was Jimena, but she actually got a little late, so she didn't get too much time. So we can talk about that. But this is what we're doing: mediation, legislation, the how, what, when, where, which, who, why, but you can do it in any order. We can start with the why. We can always do that. But I put it in the alphabetical order. I'm going to do the reverse alphabetical order after this. But this is symposium number 8. So, of course, you don't know about the other first 7. I'll take you through that when I get into talking about what I do. But this is what the whole idea was, that let's just look at everything. Let's question every aspect of it. Let's not take anything as given. And of course, local, global, everything. So now we have 50 plus speakers from 30 plus countries. Let's see if maybe more might come in as we go along. So that's what it's about. And of course, a little bit about how to find the information and what else has been happening. So what happened was, let's see, they all started with the first show that I started was Evolution of a Mediator with Ken Cloak. And all these things that I've done is because of a reason, because I always keep saying that mediators are not made in 40-hour factories. So this whole idea of, let's get into Ken Cloak and mediators of that experience. Let's get into their lives, them growing up, their value systems, their experiences, circumstances, which makes them what they are, and it's an evolution. So it started with that. So then after that, there was in conversation with the beautiful mind, I said, let's put out the faces of mediators out there. People should have a face for a mediator, because that, I think, is missing somewhere. Because when you say mediator, something should come up in front of you. Someone should come in front of you. Then there was a symposium on mediation in our culture and traditions. I'll take you through the other symposium. So this is where mediatorvikram.com, you find information. Now there are almost 550 videos there. And you asked me where I was. I am here. The location is here. The actual physical location is also here. Google Maps, you can always put Google Mediator Vikram. The World Mediation Circle is what I'm really focusing on. These are a whole web of mediation circles. Every school, college, community, organization, let's create that. So of course, Delcy is going to work with me in Australia. The support part, yes, a lot of work as time goes into this. And then the edutainment part, for each year, you'll have get an idea of what's been happening, what is going to happen for 2023, 2022. Like there was this World Mediators Conference in 2022 with 93 sessions, 80 panelists. This was in this 2021 Woodstock of Mediation, as Raphael called it. He was there yesterday. So 97 speakers from 45 countries. So there's been a lot of things, but the progression was that let's discuss each and every aspect of how I look at mediation. Everyone will have their own thing. It's the blind man and the elephant situation. So everyone will look at it differently. The way I look at it, so the next symposium was heart, soul, spirituality, and mediation, because I just feel that area did not get discussed, because theory can put words to certain things, but can't maybe put words to, or maybe there's no attempt to put it on those other aspects which happen. So let's talk about that. Then colonization, decolonization, and mediation, because I feel the mindset comes from there. And this legislation also, we'll look at that, connected to that, because how legislation has progressed in countries. I think that colonization, that mindset on legislation, then indigenous peoples and mediation. Let's look at what's been happening. That's when, do we need to legislate? Why should we do that? What has been the experience there? Then, of course, philosophy and mediation, language and mediation, and most importantly, neutrality and mediation. It was very simple. It's very simple to say mediator should be neutral. Let's debate that. So all that has happened. So then there's this, I just put it out, Magic in Mediation is the latest show that's happening. And there's been lots more. So that's a lot about what I've been doing. So let's go straight. Delcy, mediation, legislation, question it from every angle, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I have to congratulate you, Vikram, because that's an amazing job that you have been doing. And it is a great forum, this one, because it gives us an opportunity to share, as you said, ideas, to question things. For us lawyers and for our colleagues and the people who are listening to us, law, has its basis in writing, in legal instruments. There is a reason why at some point during the evolution of social groups, there was a need to write laws, to give order and to give guidance to have a harmonious social group. So why do we need legislation? Where does it come from? Who does it? Where and why? There are all very valid questions. But I would like to start just with a bit of a journey from Peru, where I trained the first 50 conciliators at the Lima Bar Association in 1989, when mediation and conciliation were terms used interchangeably as if they were the same. Of course, now we know it is not, they are similar concepts, but they are not the same. And maybe also you're going to do another program about the different, concepts that we have with these two terms. But at the time, there was a movement coming from the US, and in Latin America, as you know, we have a lot of influence in different areas from the United States. And so there was a project for access to justice in Latin America. And somebody decided that it was a good idea to write a conciliation law in Peru. And I was living in Peru at the time. And of course, I had already trained as a mediator in Australia. So the Bar Association called me, and when we had some discussions, and the idea of drafting a conciliation law was born. And I was fortunate to have been elected as an advisor to the Ministry of Justice, which was the entity in charge of drafting the legislation in the first place. So there was a lot of confusion about conciliation in Peru, because, as you know, in civil law countries, very often we have a conciliation process within the judicial process. So it's not an alternative dispute resolution process. It is included in one of the jobs that the judge has to do in order to resolve the dispute. So it is included in the civil code, in the Code of Civil Procedures, to allow the judge to conduct a conciliation process to try to resolve the dispute. So there was a lot of confusion about, well, are we talking about a different conciliation? What is happening? And I suggested that we must change it to mediation. But of course, working with lawyers, if you have 3 lawyers in the room, one situation becomes 3, and if you have 5, you have 5 different views. And it was really very challenging to, as you said, it was the mindset, working with lawyers who did not understand the principles of alternative dispute resolution, and in that case of mediation. So a conciliation law was promulgated in 1988, and against my advice, all civil cases needed to go through conciliation before making an application in court. So can you imagine a system where there's very few accredited and trained conciliators to be in charge of managing such a large number of cases, thousands of cases that were put in, they made applications in court every day? And so my advice was if we want to do this as a compulsory system, as a previous step before going to court, as a condition, if you want to, it has to be gradual. And it has to fulfill two elements. One, civic education, and that is with the population, with lawyers, the judiciary, everybody. And the second one was the efficient training of mediators / conciliators. But because at the time there was a rush, as you can understand, sometimes these situations also obey to some political interests. There was a need to promulgate this and then make it happen very quickly. I left Peru before the law was implemented fully, but my understanding is that 6 months after the promulgation of the law, there was a big catastrophe in the system because there were not enough conciliators, accredited conciliators. But not only that, they were not efficiently trained and they had very little experience. So unfortunately, that didn't work. And as we have today, the conciliation law is still there, but it is not applicable to all civil cases, only very few, and there are some procedures that need to happen. Obviously, this is the conciliators do not act independently. They have to be attached to a center, a conciliation center. And they do have, of course, a procedure. The conciliator needs to sign a document stating that either the dispute has been resolved or not. And the parties are free to take it to the court if the dispute hasn't been resolved. So this is just a little sample of how, if you do not take the necessary steps to make sure that a piece of legislation is done properly, instead of adding value, instead of assisting a system, actually can cause the opposite effect. So I don't know if you have any questions. I mean,
I have about 500 questions, but but no, we'll get. I think it's better to hear you about, because with all your experience, we'll take them up together. But one question that I have is, can I write Peru and Australia next to your name?
Of course, yes.
Because it's something we are talking about Peru also, so it's nice to know that particular perspective has also come in. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. So that happened in the early 90s, of course. Late 90s, and by the year 2000. There were many countries in Latin America also with the intention of doing legislation. And of course, Argentina followed very quickly. In fact, Argentina, one of the first countries in Latin America to write legislation about mediation, even before Peru. But again, it was mediation, not conciliation. It is important for me to make this distinction because when the Singapore Convention was drafted, also we did have a lot of discussions about the term conciliation. And finally, it had been changed to what we have today, which is mediation. So again, if we fast forward all these years, today, what's happening in Latin America, of course, as a result also from the Singapore Convention, a number of countries, Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina, Chile are all interested in signing the Singapore Convention. In fact, I think Uruguay was the last country in ratifying the convention just recently. So the importance of having a harmonized system, if you like, about mediation, it is of great importance. And that's, something that we can talk a little bit later. And also, if anyone has any questions about UNCITRAL, I'm a passionate person about the Singapore Convention because I was part of it. I was, lucky enough to have been the head of delegation of Law Asia in the UNCITRAL meetings. And, I have been part of that 3-year journey. So many things to share with you if you are interested. But going back to the what is happening in legislation and why is it important? As you said rightly, mediation is not a new, if you want, a new concept. All our ancient cultures have been using mediation in some form. But the way that we see it, formalized and in writing and legislated, of course, is a new idea. And I think the questions that you pose, of course, why is it good idea? Is it a bad idea? As I just shared the experience in Peru, if it is not done properly, then it actually does not help. But if it is done properly, I think it provides guidance. And in the case of international mediation, of course, then we are talking about treaties or conventions. We're talking about different cultures, different legal systems, different languages, different commercial practices. How do we make sure that all this wonderful work that has been achieved in each country domestically in mediation, how do we bring it up to the international sphere so it can be applied also successfully? As I heard one of the comments about the Singapore Convention and about legislation, some people think, well, it is mediation doesn't require legislation. It is been there. Why do we want to make it more complicated? But in the case of international mediation, I think it was necessary to do it. We deal, as I said, with different areas and so many complexities that it does help if we have a legal instrument to guide us all to apply mediation properly in the international sphere. So it is my view that yes, the voluntary nature of mediation does not get affected by having legislation. Of course, in Australia, when the government decided to make mediation compulsory for family matters, especially when we deal with children's matters, there was a lot of concern, especially our colleagues from the legal profession. They thought this is going to be a catastrophe, what is going to happen? Again, because of not knowing, not necessarily because mediation was not a good idea, but because there was not enough knowledge about what the process was about. So when the Family Law Act changed and it made it compulsory to go to mediation before making an application in court in regards to children's matters, there was, a lot of protests, etc. But basically, as I state again, because of not knowing what it was about. But you put forward there, and because it was compulsory, people started, especially mediators, we were saying, well, we are now chopping one of the pillars of mediation, which is the voluntary nature of it. Why are we doing this? Why are we forcing people to mediate and to agree? And the answer of many of us was, well, they are not forcing anyone to agree, because you cannot force anyone to agree. What they are doing is through a legal instrument, trying to encourage and people to participate through a process, which in the case of family law and children's matter is more beneficial than going through a court case, especially for the children. So once the legal profession accepted that this is what is going to happen, that they need to use this mechanism before making an application in court, I think there was a lot of interest from lawyers to educate themselves about mediation, the mediation process. And I understood also that the fact that mediation, the pure mediation model, will not encourage or welcome lawyers in the mediation room. That was another discussion. You know, are we then now gonna make mediation even, in a sense, withdraw all the benefits of this process because we now, need to have lawyers in the room. So there were many factors when you write legislation, in this case, as a compulsory step, what it is the benefit. We can see the benefits, 20 almost years later after the legislation, we find that the majority of cases that come to mediation are resolved through mediation, of course, and very few end up going to court to be adjudicated by the judge. And that has allowed, I think, the legal profession in Australia, at least the family lawyers now, to be very familiar with the mediation process. They have trained themselves as, in mediation. And as I said to them, very often when we conduct training in mediation here, is not for everybody to be a mediator. That is not the objective, because not everybody can do this very difficult job. And so they continue doing the legal practice, but they do understand now the process inside out, so they can guide their clients efficiently through a mediation process. So what we have now in Australia is very often clients in family law mediations will bring their lawyers. And in my view, that also has helped the evolution of mediation in Australia. I was one of the first mediation practitioners to bring lawyers into the room, and I was highly criticized for that. But why did I do that? Because I observed that in very complex family cases, there was some legal advice that was missing. And as a mediator, even if you're a lawyer, you cannot give advice to your clients. So there was something missing. And gradually, it was trying different models. My clients agreed that it was a good idea to bring their solicitors. And so we started having these mediation processes with lawyers in the mediation. And in my view, it benefited the outcome, because I was able to do my job without being, worried about the lack of legal advice that my clients will have in the room to make very important decisions. They are making decisions about their children. So they had the right to have legal advice. But all this, of course, has to be done with clarification of roles. The mediator still has to have the person that guides everybody in this process. And very often, as we all know, and when we are lawyers, we want to speak more than anyone else, and they will not allow their clients to speak. But it is about giving them these roles. There's a way, and we train about this too. When we train lawyers in mediation, we tell them what is the way to behave during a mediation process, which is completely different when they are behaving in front of a judge. So all these education has happened as a result of a legislation. And today, I think we have a very healthy mediation, family mediation practice in Australia. And it obviously is not perfect. There are some things that, the legislation, the Family Law Act did not anticipate. But so far, so good. The law has not changed since it was promulgated in 2006, if I I'm not mistaken. So we still have the same law for compulsory mediation in family law. So I don't know if at this stage you have any questions, Vikram.
I will always have so many, but I said once I start, then I'll kind of take it into a direction which, I mean, there is a thought process that I have. So I thought maybe let's look at it from your larger perspective. So because those are discussions I will have at any stage that you give me the time. So I'm okay with it if you want to take it in some direction, because look, certain important things will come up, and then the direction will be talking about conciliation and all that aspect, UNCITRAL and all those things. So better get the larger picture from Australian perspective than other Latin American country perspective. And then we'll go from there. I hope you have time.
Sure.
Perfect.
Sure. So what happens now in Australia? I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's happening in terms of legislation. Of course, we have a legislation that encourages government offices to use alternative dispute resolution, in particular mediation. We call it to be the model litigant. So the government it has not made it compulsory, but encourages all disputes arising of government contracts or government projects, etc., with third parties need to be at least there must be an attempt to find an amicable resolution through mediation, and only after that attempt has failed, then they can start court proceedings. Likewise, in property matters, for example, there is an encouragement. It is not compulsory, but there is an encouragement to find resolution through mediation. And there are similarly in different areas where mediation is used. In criminal law, we do have a very important restorative justice system programs in Australia, and it has been used for many, many years. I understand we are one of the first countries using this type of processes. Of course, at the beginning, the mediation community was a little bit surprised. Why will we like to use mediation in criminal matters? But there are certain instances where, and so that initial idea morphed into what it is today, a restorative justice system in Australia, which is, as I said, running for many, many years now, and quite successfully, especially with first offenders, and especially with young people. And so the idea of a reintroduction of perpetrators of crime into the society, this is, I'm not just saying it, it's a lot of research about this. It actually does not help the society if we just put them all in jail and do not address what the issues were before the crime was committed, but especially with young offenders. So that is one of the programs that we have here in Australia. So in general, I think we are one of the countries that uses mediation quite extensively. And I'm happy to say that now the legal profession has accepted mediation. So it's not more an unknown word. It's not confused with meditation anymore. And we, are able to have very, interesting mediation programs across the country and across the board in different sections. So then now, of course, we see our neighbors, and and the event that you were hosting the other day with Vietnam. Vietnam, for example, is a country where I have been going since 2013, conducting training, basic training about ADR and mediation, and always associated with the bar associations, the Vietnam Bar Federation, because they are really also very keen in applying mediation. There is a commercial mediation law in Vietnam currently. I understand that they are very, very interested also in signing the Singapore Convention, but they want to understand also what the implications of signing this document are. You go to Cambodia. In Cambodia, they have currently a department within the Ministry of Justice, which is also very keen in understanding the benefits of legislation, the benefits of signing the Singapore Convention. Then, of course, Singapore, I have very little to say. Singapore obviously is one of the hubs of international mediation today. There is a reason why the Singapore Convention was named after Singapore. It's a very healthy, again, mediation circle there in Singapore. In Hong Kong, mainland China as well. Hong Kong was one of the first jurisdictions to have also legislation about mediation. This was in the early 2000s. And again, because again, China has a history of using mediation in the community. So community mediation has been utilized there for hundreds of years. So it is not a new concept, but again, as a formal process, with legislation or with backed up by a law was not known, but Hong Kong started applying mediation in different civil cases, and mainland China followed very quickly after that. Then we have Indonesia, we have Malaysia also now developing very healthy ADR communities, of course, mainly arbitration, but mediation now, it's very much, an interest in these countries. There are a number of initiatives, but also there are centers already, mediation centers in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Nepal, Nepal, and of course in your country, India, where I came initially in 2013 with my friend, Mr. Anil Xavier, and was the first time that a big international conference regarding mediation was organized in Kochi. And at that point, I was also very lucky to hear former Chief Justice of India, Mr. Venkatachalaya, who asked a pledge. I think probably it was the first time in the history of mediation that somebody requested a pledge from the lawyers. And he did say that to the lawyers in the room. He said, I ask you, please resolve the disputes amicably. We don't have, the time and to resolve these thousands and thousands of cases every day. And he gave examples of a case which had been running for 12 years in the court of Delhi. 12 years, Vikram. So,
no, I'm not surprised. Okay, I mean, I did one where it was lying for 14 years. So it can happen. You can actually resolve them. It's very interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, so I think at that time, of course, again, there was a lot of interest, but because also the traditions of your country, it was very easily understood. Again, it was always the challenge working with the legal profession. What you said at the beginning is exactly right. It is about changing, the mind of how do you, go from giving advice and giving your opinion and making judgments to basically allow the parties to do all that, but on their own, a much complex process. So in the region, I think Laos also has recently and before COVID started some new initiatives about mediation. And I hope that that continues in the next years. it's always, I think, about conducting courses and workshops that are meaningful for them. You know, it's models that need to be adapted maybe to each tradition, to each culture, so it can be work better. So then, of course, now we jump into the international scene, and this is my passion, is the Singapore Convention. You know, again, highly criticized initially. Why do we need, you know, a law? Why do we need a convention? Why do we need legislation to, you know, enforce an agreement resulting from mediation? Because if you're a mediator, you know that the outcome, the agreement has come from the parties themselves. So why then the parties wouldn't want to do what they have agreed to do? And so this was one of the first questions that, you know, that were asked. Why will that be? And obviously there are many answers, but one of them is that international trade is complex. You know, as I said at the beginning, we're not dealing just with one legal system. We're dealing with two legal systems at all times, two languages, two different commercial practices. It is a more complex area. And there are instances where one of the parties, for many reasons, do not do what they have agreed to do. So what is the remedy? So traditionally, and before the Singapore Convention, if there was an agreement, then it equal to a contract. And if the contract was not fulfilled, if there was a breach of the contract, then the only remedy was to go to court. So in fact, you will spend all this money and all this time and all this effort in a mediation process and then end up in court anyway. So it was difficult to, I think, convince the clients of international commercial mediation to say, well, you know, it does actually make sense, because if one of the parties does not implement or does not fulfill the agreement, then there is now a way that you can force the other party to do what they have said to do. And that's what we have with the Singapore Convention today. Another question will be, why do you need a law if you know, each country has their own legislation, which is not true. Of course, a lot of countries do not have today legislation about mediation. And I think this is why it's important, this program. We are talking why, is it good, is it bad, is it beneficial or not? A lot of countries do not have legislation. And with the advent of the Singapore Convention, now they are all thinking, what do we do now? And of course, when the Singapore Convention was drafted, another instrument was drafted concurrently. And so at the beginning of the deliberations, we realized that there were a lot of countries which, in fact, did not have legislation in mediation, and this sort of operating without basis. And there are some other reasons, of course, but it was decided that then a model law should be drafted concurrently with the convention, which is what we did. And it is, I think it was one of the first cases in UNCITRAL where two instruments were drafted. You know, we were drafting one which was very complex, and then we decided to, why not? Let's make life more difficult. But it was done, and now we have those two instruments that guide international mediation. And of course, we have the notes and we have the rules as well, the mediation rules, as you know. So there is a lot of written concepts and guidance for all of us to utilize. So why then why the Singapore Convention was drafted. Of course, we just discussed about that. There are many other reasons, but I don't want to bore you with every single detail.
No, please. It's really interesting. I'm telling you, this is really important also, because we need that foundation, because the work has been done. People have done work for the world, not for just for any particular country. So let's hear that.
So one of the other reasons was, of course, that we all agreed that mediation was becoming very important internationally, that a lot of people wanted to use it, but because there was not, a way of enforcing the agreement, if it was needed, it wasn't necessary. But in reality, I think the mediators that we participated, the full-time mediators we participated in those negotiations, we also realized that when the New York Convention for arbitration was drafted and then signed, arbitration became more popular. A lot of people started using more arbitration. And then we thought maybe that something like this can happen for mediation as well. Because, as you know, in mediation, if the process is conducted properly and then you have everything in place, it's very unlikely that one of the parties will not perform the obligations, or will not perform the agreement, or will not implement the agreement. But we said, all right, if there is a chance that with a convention, mediation can become more well-known, then it does make sense. Of course, what we did not anticipate at the time in drafting and in negotiating the Singapore Convention was that a lot of arbitration concepts will try to morph into or get into the convention. And why was this? Because at the beginning, a lot of the participants in those meetings were not very familiar with mediation. And I'm happy to say that, because, we all became friends and everything, but, it was clear that not many participating that understood the differences even between arbitration and mediation. So it was a task for the mediators in those negotiations to use the coffee breaks and lunches and dinners and every opportunity that we had to share with all the colleagues the concepts of mediation, the benefits, the differences, etc. So it became really a very interesting journey for all of us. So when finally we, in 2018, in February, the final draft was done, there was a sense of great achievement. And it was almost as if we all have conducted a mediation process within those negotiations. And I know there's a lot of things written, books about the Singapore Convention, etc., etc. But there's so much that happened outside those meetings and in the informal meetings that we all had. Because as in mediation, we try to understand why this delegation did not agree with this article, for example. And then we will hear the real reasons with certain rules, of course, of not confidentiality, but, the Chatham House rules was used for these very important conversations. So we were able to advance these things, but importantly, understand why certain articles were not agreed upon by some delegations. And it became, in my mind, really very much a mediation process where you conduct, your joint meetings, your bilaterals, etc., to try to understand. And we also did a little bit of reality testing, of course, quite a lot, actually. And so that resulted in what we have today. And it is important to note that a legal instrument, any law, is not perfect. And I know there's a lot of criticism the Singapore Convention is too general, or is to this and is to that. One has to understand that when you write a convention of that way, of that nature, of that importance, you are dealing with a number of delegations, 60 plus countries, plus observers. And how do you write, for example, an article that makes sense in English and it doesn't make sense in French or in Mandarin? So it was a big challenge to try to understand, to bring something together from two different, legal systems, civil law, common law. How do we make sense? And then the writing of it. It will be written mainly in English, but then it will be translated. And then the interpreters will make the translation. And then the delegations will say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense for us. So then we have to renegotiate the wording of this article. So I think we have to remember that what was achieved in writing the Singapore Convention, it's historical. It's never happened in the history of UNCITRAL the way it was done. And yes, it is not a perfect instrument. I don't think there is a perfect law in any case. But what we have to remember is what was the spirit of that legislation, the spirit of the law. At the end of the day, we have to remember again why the Singapore Convention was written. And if we remember, that it was because we wanted to harmonize, we wanted to promote mediation, we wanted to have a more, peaceful, amicable resolutions, then that's what we have to remember. And then try to make interpretations of the articles with that in mind. So, I don't know, there's so much that I could tell you. Because
what you're saying, I'm telling you very interesting things that you're coming out with. It's really important. Like you said, let me look at it this way, that mediators are sitting there. If they have been called in to look at the drafting the convention, you've done a good job when you actually got everyone together, because when you see the Singapore Convention and the model law, you actually see a framework which has taken care to a large extent how mediation should be looked at, and not bringing in the arbitration aspect of it. It's very important, because today the best part is that you can actually do that mediation anywhere in the world. It doesn't even have to be a signatory country, and you can actually enforce it in a country which has ratified it. That framework itself is so important, that message is so important, that here this is actually a process which can happen anywhere. Like I keep saying, even for domestic legislation, look at this aspect, that you can do this anywhere, anyone can do it. There's no qualification required for the mediator under the Singapore Convention. Any mediator can do it, and at the end of it, you can enforce it in a country as a court decree. Actually the structure can't be better, and that's what I'm saying. Maybe people actually put it together. The first thing that you've done is you actually put a definition to mediation, which is missing even where legislation is there. That's the interesting part. People have gone out and legislated on mediation without putting that there. And look at the definition. It's nice and broad. All those issues that have always been spoken about in relation to mediation, the blind man and the elephant situation, the whole thing has been so broadly defined. I keep putting out this particular definition all the time, because if you don't have it in a legislation, and you, at least a country like us which have signed it, please go to this definition. At least in principle, you've accepted this definition. Then look at your legislation, and that's when this whole conciliation mediation thing I'm going to get you into, because that's where it makes it much easier. Does the legislation, when it says conciliation, does this fit into this definition? And if it does, then it is mediation. That's what the whole idea is. And then the whole aspect of, in the model law, actually clarifying this. This is what the important thing is, that you actually clarified it here. Then further clarification in the footnote. that this was the understanding earlier, and now we have changed this, but there is no substantive or conceptual implication. I mean, this is really important because I've been talking about this for such a long time, that India has an excellent law on mediation, and then we have institutions and lawyers and judges and even mediators saying we don't have a law. Why do you say that? I mean, you are, even if lawyers, let's look at it, you know how to interpret statutes. If you don't have a definition in your statute, where would you go to? You have a convention that you have signed. Are you going to look at that definition or not? And if you look at it, does your conciliation fit into it? So those are important things. I mean, of course, in your discussions, definitely voluntary was missing from here, because definitely the countries would have discussed that we are going to go through it in the court system, and please don't put voluntary there. I mean, those kind of things would have come up. Okay, I'm not going to get into it. I'm a critic of that. I do criticize that whole concept of the court system. So I won't get into that, but I can understand there were definitely some reasons for that. But otherwise, I mean, I'm just saying that a framework came in, which is really important to discuss, because putting a framework together and then sending the message out, because let's go back to the conciliation rules of the UNCITRAL 1980, because we adopted those. We are 45, almost 45 years later from that rule, those rules, and we took it in 1996 we enacted it into our Arbitration and Conciliation Act. So today, even today, that discussion on the conciliation, and this is conciliation, the potato discussion. All I'm saying is there are people hungry. They want to have mashed potatoes. And here what we are doing, this is potato, no potato, and we'll keep fighting it there. Let's just give them the mashed potatoes. Let them eat. They're hungry, and we've kept them hungry for whatever reason, because, okay, I won't get into the inefficiencies of the judiciary. So there's lots there, which I think we nearly need to clarify, which is really, really important, because again, I'll take you through this because you'll understand this, that the two words are required. And I've been talking about it because our legislation on Arbitration and Conciliation Act, the arbitration section has a section 30, which says that in an arbitration, there should be it's like a duty of the arbitrator, see that if they can settle it through mediation or conciliation. In our civil procedure code, mediation and conciliation, both words are used there. It is, for me, very simple why you need two words in general, because for the arbitration part, you want to stay in the arbitration or you want to go out of the arbitration. If you want to stay in the arbitration, you use the same process, but we call it mediation because you don't want to go into the conciliation section. So we use the word mediation because otherwise we'll have to define the whole thing. Use a process where you get a third person. You don't need to do that. Although there should have been a definition, there's no definition there. So you go stay in the arbitration, get into, you settle it, come to the arbitrator, passes a consent award, which is as good as a court decree. You want to go out of the arbitration, go into the conciliation section, your settlement agreement is as good as a consent award, which is as good as a court decree. So you need both, because if you want to stay in the arbitration, the advantages that you get is you can use the New York Convention. When you go out into conciliation today, there was, I mean, at that time, there was no framework of the Singapore Convention. But if you want to use the Singapore Convention, that is your route. I'm looking at the international part of it, because otherwise that aspect would not be there. Because if you stayed in the arbitration, it would have been the New York Convention. And today, yes, the New York Convention is popular and everything, but supposing it was not, but you had the Singapore Convention, which was popular, then you could have come into conciliation, use that. So now again, in the court system, you want to stay in the court system. So it's called mediation. You stay there. If the settlement come to the judge, passes a decree, you go out into conciliation. That settlement agreement is as good as a court decree. Why the difference is, if you stay in the court and you get a court decree, I'm looking at it from the international again. If you get a court decree, you cannot enforce it under the Singapore Convention. But you want to use the Singapore Convention, so you should go out of the court and use the conciliation part. So you need those two words. I don't think people understand that, yes, those two words are required for a purpose. Then now look at it, forget the international part. Domestically, there are going to be mediations taken up all the time. Contracts will be verbal also. Third people would come into that situation. Are you going to call it the same? They don't want to use any legislation. They don't want to come under any legislation. They just want to sit with someone. They settle it. That's a mediation, and that is a contract. They don't want anything more than that. And like I said, in our conciliation section, you need a written settlement agreement. These people do not want a written settlement agreement. They're agreed. Their word of mouth is good enough. Well, who are we to question that? That by itself, will you say that's not a mediation? Will not that be enforceable as a contract? Are you going to say, no, you use the word mediation, but you did not follow the act? So now this is not a settlement. We will know, you can't even enforce it as a contract. Absurd things will come up. So I'm saying you need those two words, and there are, I mean, clarification from the place where in our legislation we took it, which is the conciliation rules, UNCITRAL's rules. They have clarified it. So I just keep telling people, just stop this argument. You have a good legislation. Now, what are the issues with the legislation? So you are, Delcy, going to take us through. You have a framework, you've put in a model law. That model law, of course, should be a model law when legislation is passed in various countries. So in that case, what do you feel may have got left out? Because when you have to look at various people's point of views, so definitely there might be something, but I feel the structure is quite all right. I don't see any issues there, so it can be implemented. So from that end, I'm looking at from the international part. I'm saying all this to you right now because you can take it all together. On the other end, the fact that it is successfully, that whole concept of the legislation has worked, I feel we have to really discuss, when is something successful or has worked. Do we have lots of full-time mediators in Australia? I think that part of it, you will tell us about that, because finally, is that success? Because one, you said done well, and the other I'm saying is doing well. So you said legislation has done well in the way it's put together, whatever they think. But is it doing well? Because for me, doing well is when you have full-time mediators, when there is a dispute, you call a mediator in, you don't contact a lawyer. That's the point. Because people, I keep telling them, you will hear me in lots of places, that this is a colonial concept, that dispute resolution happens in courts and lawyers have to be part of it. That whole culture that has been hundreds of years of conditioning of the mind, that when it changes, that is when I feel that we've reached somewhere, then it's doing well. And the fact that you actually understand a lawyer is an expert in law. When the dispute requires an expert in law, bring a lawyer in. When it requires an expert in the act of say a civil engineer or a surveyor, you bring that person in. There's a valuer required, you bring the valuer in. You don't have to have the valuer sitting in the entire mediation. You don't have to have the civil engineer sitting in the entire mediation. So why do we think that a lawyer, everything is not about the law? And if it is about the law, then we've got the whole concept about mediation wrong. So that is where the process, understanding of the process itself. But I'm still saying that the lawyers and the judiciary have a lot of, I think they can put a lot of pressure in countries. So legislation goes into directions where the judiciary and the lawyers get involved. I feel that pressure, if it goes away, legislation would definitely look like what you have put out, the model law. It can be that, but the vested interest, the self-interest, institutions. I mean, we had a committee to draft the model, the bill, mediation bill. Institutions who are doing training are sitting there, and obviously they will say, yes, there is a requirement to do a training. Do we understand the scale of this country? They will say, in that country they did it. That country had 30 million people. You have 1.4 billion people. Do you pick up everything? So the vested interests on the other side, the judiciary has a vested interest. They're inefficient. Yesterday, Rafael was there from Mexico. He said it's reached a point when actually there would be, I mean, it just break, the whole structure would just break because there's so many matters going in. So obviously they need a release, but we are not there to serve their purpose. For me, the point is, again, there was yesterday only, there was Sophie from Georgia. What do they say? The law says that there will be a certain number of free mediations that the mediator do. Tell me, which other legislation says that lawyers will do so many free? Yes, by themselves, legal aid happens, whatever, but by mandatory, you make it under the law. Only mediators maybe just accept it. So I'm saying judiciary self-interest, their inefficiencies, they'd have to sort. If people are actually, because of the inefficiency of the judiciary, they have to settle when they do not walk out happy because they could not have got justice in courts, because justice delayed is justice denied. So they settle. That's not, for me, mediation, first of all. That's because it's not self-determination. because there was an influence on the negative influence on the other side. So you did it. You won't go back happy. You won't talk about it to people. You won't spread the good word. How does mediation develop if the people don't talk about it? You need, then other thing is that do they have a face to mediator, which is what I said when I started that in conversation, the beautiful mind. Do they have a face to mediator? For me, it is doing well when you have a face. Everyone, like, you know who a doctor is, you know who a lawyer is. Do they know who a mediator is? In that many years in Australia, do they know that? That's what I'm saying. You would tell us better about that. So those are the kinds of things. There are lots of others that will come up, but on these things, what thoughts would you
have? Well, there are very interesting thoughts, Vikram. I think that to start with, the model law, of course, is what its name says. It's a model. And each country needs to adapt and adopt the law as it's necessary and it is required for their own particular reasons. I believe that if you try to impose a model, a law, or anything else in a country without taking into account the particularities of the country, then it is not going to work. It has to respond. If we go back, and I go back to my law studies, why do you have a different law in India and we have a different law in Australia or in Peru? Because the laws have to respond to the needs of these different social groups. And that's why they are different. It's different in Indian, it's different in Peruvian, it's different in Australia. So when we discuss about model law, it's exactly that. We are giving them a model that they can adjust to what works best for them. Now, what has happened in the past is that a lot of countries, they just adopt the whole thing. It is easy. They don't change anything and they implement the whole model law as it is without consideration of their own internal and their own domestic differences. So I was called for a project in a country, and they told me this is the mediation, how is it working? We wanted to change, and please, can you help us this and that? And my first question to them was, can you explain to me how these mediation processes are working in your country? And they told me, and I said, and are they working? And they said, yeah, mostly yes. And I said, why do you want to change it then? Why do you want to change it just because another country, promulgated this other fancy law? But if it is working for you, why do you want to change? It is always about the needs of the people who's going to use mediation. And you're exactly right. It is what is going to be beneficial for the end users of mediation. Mediation is not there. It's not for me to be a satisfied mediator. Of course, it's nice when you have a good outcome, but it is because the parties come with a problem, with a dispute, and they resolve it through a process and with the assistance and the guidance of the mediator. That is good. But again, the focus is on the parties, not on the mediator. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that, right?
No, I'll come in for a second only, because I'm telling you that when we look at the user, we look at statistics. I'm telling you, today, we were discussing with Ashian from Turkey. She's saying in labor cases, it's been very successful. Even Rafael was talking about it. But good thing Ashian also said at the same time, but they were settled because those people didn't have a choice. Their power imbalances. So it wasn't that the mediation result was something that they wanted. The mediation result was because of the inefficiencies of the court. And we will on statistics say that in labor cases in Turkey, it's doing really well. So let's adopt it. We have to be very, very careful, because the user is not going back happy. You said, no, we have to focus on the user. The user is not going back happy, but that is not reported anywhere, because no one goes to 200,000 or 2 million users and asks them. They go, okay, successful. All that is successful. What did that person go through? Their emotions there are his needs. everything that has been missed out in the statistics. So I'm saying that we have to be very careful, because maybe it's not working when actually statistics show it's working.
Completely 100% in agreement. And I also have some issues with some of our mediator colleagues when the first thing that they put there is, I have a 90% success rate. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? Does that mean that that you are promoting yourself as the 90% success rate mediator? I have some ethical issues with that kind of conversation. And of course, I understand that some of our colleagues want to promote the services in certain way, but you're right. When we say success, what do we mean with that? It is that the parties have actually resolved their dispute. And very often, as you know, it has happened to me many times when they have not agreed in the mediation. But 1 week or 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, they call me and they say, look, we have come to an agreement because the process allowed us to think and to develop, understanding of the other person's, ideas or situation. And so we have come up with this solution, and thank you very much. So then, of course, then you say at that point when the mediation finished was not successful. But how many more cases could have gone without that sort of perceived success? And if done properly, the mediation obviously changes the dynamics, right? And once the parties have empathy and understanding and all those things, then that's when the real change happens. So I agree with you. It's not about the statistics. And I understand a lot of, governments, when they are putting things in place, they need the numbers, etc. But one must to be, I agree, one has to be very careful. When we say success, what do we mean by that? And that takes me to the point that you mentioned about, full-time mediators. Is the system working? If it is working, then it means that you have mediation as a profession, happening in different jurisdictions. I think eventually this is, I have seen since I trained as a mediator in 1994, a huge change, even in the perception of, if you're a mediator, for a lawyer and a mediator, then suddenly on those years, people, the colleagues don't see you like, even with respect. They think, what is this person doing? They have, and, you forward all these years, and they now it's a different dynamics. Especially the colleagues who go through the training of mediation, they say, oh, I don't really understand how can you guys do this. It is very difficult. It is much easier to be the lawyer of one client than to be a person who facilitates a solution for two parties, 2 or more parties. So I think there is, and I like your word, the evolution of even of the profession, as a mediator. And I am lucky, I am a full-time mediator, and I know that not a lot of colleagues are there, but my word to them is, be patient. This for me, being a full-time mediator didn't happen overnight, didn't happen in 1 year, didn't even happen in 5 years, even in 10 years. It has been a long journey where, we have opened, roads and paths for everybody. The education, the talking, the demonstrating that this is a worthwhile process. That has more benefits than any other process that I have used as a dispute resolution method. I think we are, with the help of the Singapore Convention, and I think this is the other thing that we didn't anticipate. We thought this is going to be big, but today we have 55 countries have signed the convention, 11 have ratified it. and there are more in the mix. And of course, the 2 years of the pandemic did not help to any of these things. But just looking at that, I am very optimistic that we can actually develop a very strong mediation profession globally. What we have to be careful is to not allow this, and this I have heard from colleagues, from lawyers, that they say to me, why do we need to have a training? We know this, we have been resolving dispute for many years. We don't need any mediation training. And they, in fact, require in many countries, they wanted to put forward provisions where a lawyer would automatically be accredited as a mediator. And that, I think, we have to observe and we have to be cautious. As you said rightly, lawyer mind is one thing and a mediator mind is another thing. And it doesn't happen automatically, because you're a lawyer doesn't mean that you are a mediator. So we have to make sure that there is an efficient and appropriate training. And now there's a discussion about, how do we make a standard of accreditation internationally, that a mediator from India can go and mediate in in Canada, and there's no, so there is already a lot of spaces where a lot of discussions need to happen. There is currently we're trying to organize a task force where we can, mediators from all over the world sit down and say, look, this is what will look like as a standard international accreditation. Is that something that needs to happen or not? There's the space for that discussion. And again, a lot of our colleagues, we start with very basic cases. I don't know of any experienced international mediator that started doing international mediations the first day. It is a long road. It is a very, very challenging profession. But I am very optimistic that, with the legal instruments that we have now internationally, we can achieve a very strong profession globally, and programs like Use Vikram. I mean, this is something that we all talk. Every country that I go, I talk about the Singapore Convention, of course, and try to, to talk to officials and governments to convince them that this is a good thing to do. But it is, it's not easy. We still have those challenges, but I feel in the old days, I felt very lonely. I felt that there's not many people supporting mediation, and it was very hard. But now I feel that there's so many people out there, who understand the benefits, who are happy to talk about it, who are happy to put forward the programs like these and workshops and conferences and everything. And to me, that is really, it feels really nice.
Yeah. But there's one question I could not have asked you. I could have asked you, but it wouldn't have served any purposes. What would you like to drink? Because you've been seeing me sipping things, so it's been rude. It's been rude, but this is the limitation of the screen interaction. So I could not ask that. But you've opened into something. I don't know whether you heard me. I have a big issue with this entire training, accreditation, certification aspect of it. Huge issue I have. One, look at it from the institutional part of it. People are told, we'll make you a mediator, we'll make you an international mediator. So that whole money making thing is happening on that side. Then you have to look at what are the numbers where you are telling them that yes, you are becoming an international mediator. Because we'd have to go through statistics, and a lot of them I don't have a lot of them, but I just look at the Singapore Mediation Center, because you said hub kind of thing. 25 years, they've done 5,200 matters. And you can imagine how many mediators must have been told that you are going to be part of a panel and all those things. Numbers are not there in that part of the world, that part of mediation itself, that institutional, international, jams. Everyone talks about jams, the largest ADR thing. They do 9,000 mediations in the whole year. And even if you know, I mean, they have the number of people they have on the panel. I don't like to use the word neutral. They use the word neutral. For me, that neutral itself is a debatable part of it. But they have, you can understand how many people they have there. So that's in terms of numbers. And of course, I will look at it from the other side. I will give you the Indian example, but a lot of countries you will find that example in terms of backlog. How many cases you have lying in courts? How many go into courts? Have you been looking at numbers? I'm just trying to 25 years, 5,200. Just a guess, Delcy, because you worked with people in India. How many pending in courts in India? Hearing from you would be better. Just a guess. Just a guess. Just a guess.
I don't know, 500,000, 1 million cases. I don't know.
Very, very close. 50 million. 50 million cases lying in courts. 18 million coming in every year, only 18 million going out, 50 million remain the same. You have to understand the scale of it. We even talk about training. Who is doing that training? What is happening there? No one, I mean, no one really can you even go into that and see whether what is being told to them is something that is actually going to be used by them to practice? You are creating a theoretical world. I mean, there's a whole theoretical world you can create. We want people practicing as mediators. And practice, for me, everyone talks about that whole thing, but I'm on the other side. No certification, no training. So when I say that people talk about mock mediation, I was to one of the World Mediators Conference. Ivana was there from the IMI. And of course, she definitely doesn't like my direction going there. But I was saying what I'm trying to do is actually going to help all these institutions. What I'm saying is there are people who are actually practicing as mediators today. They have no certifications, no qualifications. These people with the mediator mindset we have to bring out. Then we already have the user experience done. Your mock mediations, you were saying, our mock mediations and all we do so that the user gets a certain experience. I'm saying that should be the starting point. The user experience done. That's now let's take this person. Then you take into your institution connects this person into mediation and whatever theoretical part that person connects with it, they'll come to you. But I'm on the other side where I want them to do mediations and they can do them without going through all this process because they're already doing it. So my direction of it is different. Wherever else this person goes, whatever you do with that certification, if it benefits that person, damn good. But don't mislead them. I've been saying, I have so many young people who've been told you're becoming a mediator. How do you make a mediator in a 40-hour factory? Let's all education in schools to be stopped. Only 40 hours is going to be given to people. They're going to change people into getting a mediator mindset. I mean, it's just misleading them. They spend huge amounts of money. So Delcy, sometimes you should listen to those people and you should find out from them what they've gone through. They're children who have convinced their parents that, okay, I am spending so much money, but I'm becoming a mediator. Zero work, frustration, disillusion, out of it. This thing we are talking about, of course, in this institutional thing. Now look at the court system. We have a mediator in the US, senior mediator, Jeff Kitchavan. He was speaking about it, how he was part of the court system and how he was doing it for free, only to be recognized by lawyers. First of all, lawyers have control of mediation. That by itself has to be looked at, where that direction has gone. But to be recognized by lawyers. No work came in, no private work came in, got disillusioned, got out of it. So now he's a mediator, of course, privately, and he has his private practice, one of those full-time mediators, the rare ones in the world. He does that. He says, I went to the Beverly Hills Bar Association and I look out there every time a new lot comes in and it is being given for free. And who are these people? These large corporations who are in that area. You're giving that for free. He very nicely distinguishes between free and pro bono. He says free is to someone who can afford it. Pro bono is to a person who can't afford it. You are giving it free. What are you doing? Because you use the word respect. What are you doing? You're telling people that this is a free kind of activity. These people, how does society today in this materialistic world value people in relation to the money? These people get nothing, so they are nothing. That's the word that will spread. They don't, if they were putting any value, they would have got something. No. And this is a case situation in every part of the world. I mean, yesterday itself, Sophie was saying about how demeaning it is. The amount that they give them, of course, they have to do certain free. But then after that also, she's saying that amount is demeaning. There's another mediator from Nigeria, senior mediator. He says, I walk into that court as a mediator. He's a lawyer. He walks it as a mediator. They don't respect him because he gets nothing. So we have created a very, on the other side, what we are creating for me is a big issue, but there are vested interests on the other side. So I'm not going to fight that on the other end. So why am I taking you through the other end is because then you look at legislation from that. My concept is people, of course, we as maybe as me or other people help identify those with the mediator mindset. That's the first thing, because what I call the world mediation circle. So you create a mediation circle in a community, in a school. You ask the people, who are those people in your school or your community who have that mindset, who help people resolve their disputes. We'll get names. Then we distinguish between the two. One is who's actually just getting them together. That's the peacemaker. And the other has the skill of a mediator, because everyone doesn't have the skill of a mediator, but it all goes into this broad category that, oh, this person helps people resolve disputes. How do they do it? Just ask them questions, you get the answer. Okay, this one is a peacemaker, that's a mediator. Now we've got the people. Now you go out and, of course, once you tell people that this person, what this person does is mediation, but we are not, why are we're not married to that word. When you are looking at legislation, when you look at the model law, let's have a look at what words have been used in different languages. I don't know. I mean, you would tell me better, but mediation, the word, is it used or is it a word in their language? Because the point is, we are not trying to connect them to the word. We are connecting them to the process. So they will connect with the process when you connect them with the person who does the process that they know about. So they know, oh yes, this is what mediation is, or whatever other word that is used in the local language. And that part, once we have the person, people connecting with the process, then usage of the process, then these people are going to be able to look at it as a livelihood, because it's a way of life. When you said profession, I had a discussion in that World Mediators Conference on, is it a profession or a way of life? We have to also look at it, because when you say profession, then you go into the direction of training and certification. Is this one of those things? Then I ask people, I mean, you would know, most countries, you can tell me about Australia, legislators are not, they don't need any qualification, no certifications, no training. Why do they do that? Why have they been able to get out of that? Is because it's trust of the people. Who do you trust? You can't limit the people you trust. Same thing applies to mediation. You can't limit the people someone trusts. And this is where I have been discussing about the colonization mindset. We will tell you whom you can trust. You are savages. You don't know whom to go to. My person is the one you have to go to. This is where it's a fundamental flaw in the way it's trying to be created. So this is a trust by people to whoever. I keep saying, you train for 40-hour factories don't make mediators. Disputing people, they can make anyone a mediator. They're the only people who can make mediators. So it's the trust that they have. So that is the way I would want it to go forward. And then, of course, once it is because look, what has happened over time is society itself and communities themselves are broken down. Mediation comes in to a great extent when you have communities, because it is more than just the amount at stake. It's about relationships, and maybe even, of course, healing is one part, strengthening is another part. Those are things that I look at as from the mediation perspective, not settlement conferences. So from that end, those things come up as a community. Even a family is also a community. Everything is not a larger residential community. It's families, even organizations are communities. So in all those places, the way society has changed in terms of social structure, that gets mirrored into communities of all kinds, which gets mirrored onto national level, which gets mirrored onto the global level. The whole aspect of, are we a community? Because if you're a community, then you're trying to work together in a collaborative way. That part, if it's broken down. So I think the people with the mediator mindset have a role to actually get communities together. That's when also mediation goes forward, because you have a community which is looking at mediation. And whenever it's spoken about, when I say community, everyone says community mediation. And no, it's not community mediation. It's the community having that culture of mediation. And that is, organizations also can have that, because finally you have to collaborate within organizations also. So that mindset you take there. So what you do in a residential community, yes, those people in that residential community are going to be people who work in organizations, who are part of the government, who are doing their businesses, whatever. They're part of residential communities. So if they take the culture of experiencing it in their community, they can take it into their organizations or their businesses. If you create it in the organization, that mediation circle, they will take it into the residential communities. That's how it's all going to work together. So looking at it from that perspective, from me making this World Mediation Circle and mediation circles, now look at legislation and give me some hope that yes, Delcy understands and what direction it's going to take. Please.
Oh, Vikram, I was just listening to you and I was thinking, wouldn't that be wonderful if that actually happens the way you are speaking? Because of course, in principle, that will be the perfect, setting. A person who has the natural skills to bring people together, to resolve, help them resolve the disputes. And if you look at that model, traditionally in a lot of countries, and this is what I was telling you, that when this particular government asked me, it is already working for them in this way that you are speaking. And this community mediator, they are not even called mediators, it's something else, but they don't charge any money. So they just go. And then people who have the problem, they go to them and they sit with them, not for 1 hour or 2 hours, but sometimes the whole day. And they eat together and they, have all these conversations for the whole day. And then at the end, they have some resolution of some sort. Sometimes they have to come back the next day, or maybe then whatever it is, another 2 days. In Peru, in the mountains where I was born, we have this model as well. So there is somebody, normally it's an elder or somebody that has some, moral standing, and people with problems, they go to them. They don't go to the judge, because in some little towns we don't have even the courts or anything. So this is exactly what happens in those places, and then what they get, these mediators, unofficial mediators, is maybe the parties, if they are happy with the resolution, they come and they bring them a chicken or maybe some nice food, or they invite for some dinner or something. This is the way it works. But if you want to put that one into the international scene, of course, it becomes really complex. How do we actually achieve the same effects of this? And it might be because now we, human beings, we complicate our lives unnecessarily sometimes, but it is what it is. We create social norms and we create all these fancy, complex systems, etc. And how do we now take that model of that little village where the natural peacemaker or the mediator resolves all these problems into the international, into the global scale? I think one has to be, very aware of the difficulties of somebody who really wants to, and has the natural skills to become a mediator, an international mediator for that. Because you're right, there is this it's almost like a sausage factory. Even in Australia, it happens. We're training so many mediators, thousands of them, Vikram, and then they have nothing to do. They bear at least once a week. I receive calls from a accredited mediator who has not done one mediation in 1 year. And so that then they say to me, I'll come and do it for free, and I'm thinking, how are we failing the mediation itself in facilitating this production almost mass production of mediators. And some of them, they don't even want to do it. Some of them, they maybe have been given this false assumption that you're going to make a lot of money in a very short period of time. And as I said, this is something that doesn't, happen in this way. When we train mediators, and I really these days don't do much of that. We mostly concentrate in workshops and people who already been trained, and then they come and co-mediate with me, for example, and we do all the things with them to try to sort of keep their hope in being mediators. But very, very seldom organizations that offer these trainings do that. Once that they have finished with the training, that's it. They forget about these people. And they are there, So we always say to them, look, you want to be a mediator, great, but don't quit your job yet. Don't think that this is becoming 100, full-time thing overnight, not even in 1 year, not even, as I said, for me, it didn't even happen, within 10 years. But how do we then provide a space for the real mediators, the ones who actually really want to do this difficult job in a structure, in a legal framework, as you said, the accreditations and all these things that are happening now internationally? Because unfortunately, in the international scene, there is not this time or this connection to actually recognize the true mediator who, might not even have an accreditation, but does have the natural skills to perform this task. How do we do that? So that is the challenge. The challenge when you take it to the international scene is how do we duplicate this model of the small village? How do we take it there? That is the big challenge. And of course, then we have, interests, of course, especially if you are dealing with international commercial disputes. The parties in these disputes, they want a resolution. They don't necessarily want to know, the qualities of the mediator. Most of the appointments in these international commercial mediations happen because the lawyers, have a big influence. They are the gatekeepers for this. They are the ones, as you said, rightly, they're saying, use this person or this other person. These 9,000 or 5,000 mediations per year. Who are doing this? This is just a small number of people who's doing the same thing. And how do we know? I mean, there are cases here in Australia where, and I'm not going to name names, but there are former judges who have no qualification or no accreditation as mediators, and they are conducting mediations, which, when described to me how they have done it, is not a mediation. It's almost like a private court, it's an adjudication process, but they are calling it mediation. But why do they go to these people? Is because the lawyers say, oh, we are going to use a former, judge such and such is going to be the mediator. And when I talk to them, explain to me, what did he do? And it is not a mediation, Vikram. It is an adjudication process, right? So then you have it. So it is good to have then maybe a provision which it says that the mediator needs to have some kind of accreditation, and then we have all these people who think that they can do the job, but they actually cannot, and they are not actually doing it. They are using a different process. It's not mediation. And further damaging what mediation it is, because then these people go and say, oh, there was a good mediation, but it wasn't. It was an adjudication process. So, how do we balance this need of having actually somebody who does mediation and without or with accreditation? How do we do that? It is a complex set of questions when we want to do the right thing. And I don't know if we have the right answer, but I think if we can agree that mediation is here to stay. So mediation is now being taken from that obscure little place where people would not even know what it means to what it is today. It is brought to the international stage. Now we are talking about mediation. Before the Singapore Convention, not many people are interested in talking about this. So we have now the attention of a lot of people. So let's have the discussions, let's have the dialogue, let's have programs like this where we all discuss and see how can we advance and how can we make sure that the mediation doesn't lose the benefits that it has, because it's been completely changed for whatever outside sources and forces. How do we keep that going? How do we keep that, what got most of us into this world of mediation? It was not about money. I was doing free mediations for years, and I think my first check was $10 for a case, so how do we do this? How do we keep this flame of it is possible to resolve disputes in a amicable way, in a way that fosters peace, fosters this nice feeling in the community. As you said, it's not just about the people here, because that goes into their families. If a successful mediation, the parties go back to their homes happy, and they share with their families, look, we resolved the dispute, and that goes into the wider community. So I think that's it. I think the message from me is, yes, it's not an easy road from what happens now, and I don't know exactly how we're going to do it. There are some ideas, of course, but let's keep this flame going. Let's keep the space open. Let's keep talking about the good things about mediation. Let's have that feeling of achieving good things through this process. And I think that's a lot. If we can keep people motivated with that, I think we can achieve a lot of things. And I don't know if I have answered your question.
No, I tell you, look, the thing is that, because of course I asked you about the aspect of these people, maybe at the community level, but of course you are looking at it from the international perspective. I am saying that we have not attempted to build it. They have not building it. What happened was, it was in the formal structure, it was thrown on the people because of the inefficiencies of the judiciary. So the US started the whole concept of mediation in the court system, and everyone said successful concept, which I just told you, don't go by statistics. What's really happening there? Did the person come out being happy, wanted to talk about it to other people, wanted to, with the word of mouth? If that had happened for 50 years, amazing things would have happened on the ground. There would have been mediators doing amazing full-time work. It did not happen. So there's a fundamental issue which no one understands. I'm saying on that end, I'm saying, judiciary, please put your house in order. Your inefficiencies should not come into mediation, because it is a standalone process which has nothing to do with the judiciary. It is like you have natural remedies, like we have Ayurveda. Ayurveda has nothing to do with what we call modern medical science. They're two different areas. But people, the medical council of a country wants to regulate Ayurveda. I think there's a fundamental issue in how you're looking at it. So I'm just saying, just judiciary, stay away, get your house in order, because you are denying justice. So on that end, you have to work on it, because I feel that if you are going to be denying justice and you have a say in a country and you can create these legislations and push them people into it, you are going to give mediation a bad name. Mediators don't benefit, because they have the passion and they will come into the courts. They'll do it for free also, because they just love it. But at the end of the day, they won't get any respect. They won't be able to do it, of course, on a full-time basis. So whenever they get time, they'll do it. So it's not going to happen. But on the grassroots part of it, I'm not saying it's going to happen in a day or two, but the build up happens from there, because even on the international level, the person comes out from a school. Let's just look at a school. A person comes out from a school and tomorrow is doing business on the global level. The culture of it has to come from it being their process. The problem that I've seen is peer mediation concept goes out. We are going to come to you. We are going to tell you how to do it. We know best. No, these children know best. All we have to do is, that's why I call it the mediation circle. We are just saying, you find the people within yourselves who have that mindset. You people who want to resolve in an amicable, collaborative way, you come into the circle. Those peacemakers who can get people together, they come into the circle. Might be 4 people in that circle, not a problem. At least when that grows, when people see, yes, people can sit together and actually resolve things, more people would want to come into it. And I've been talking about it, about the fact that activism, advocacy, and politics is on one side, which has lots of money, a lot of vested interest on that side. A space has not been created where you have objective discussions. You just are able to discuss what you were saying, that on the UNCITRAL basis, you were discussing, looking at everyone's point of view. You were able to do that same thing on a small level. It's all, I'm telling you, it all gets mirrored. If you can have conversations on a little group in a school, you can have conversations with 30 countries and people there. We are having a discussion, aren't we? So people can have discussions. That's what I've been trying to put out with whatever I do, that people can have conversations, which is being missed out because of vested interests and various other reasons, but it's possible. So let's create that space. That child knows, yes, I can identify the person and I can bring that person in to resolve my dispute. And there are people in my school, or maybe people around me, who have that mindset to bring us together. So I can do that. Now, when that kind of a little confidence comes in the person that I can resolve my dispute, to a certain extent, now we fought against that colonial mindset, which was thrown on people, which has influenced people over time and gone to the next generation, to the next generation. But we start here, we see, even in children, it's very interesting. There was someone who was in one of my shows, his son came in. So I always ask children this question: who was there in your school, and would you help someone resolve the dispute? And the boy said, young boy, I think about 8, 10 years old, says, I won't help my friend. I said, why? Teacher won't like it. In their mind, already their authority figure has come into their mind. That teacher will decide what to do. I can't do it. So it's a major fight, Delcy, on that, at that level. But we have to do that from there, because the mindset is there. It has not
Yep.
been influenced so much. At any point of time, you don't have time, you can tell me, because I love having conversations. So whenever you're short of time, you can tell me. You're not going to be rude when you say that, okay? You can easily say, I have other things to do at any point of time. But I'm trying to create this structure for you because I want you to comment on legislation. Why on this basis? Because I want it to be their process. It's a people's process. But what is it that you want to protect through legislation, which will give them more confidence? Which I've been saying, confidentiality being a without prejudice process, and the mediator not being called as a witness, and the whatever agreement you get into is as good as a court decree. Sitting at home, you can do it. So that's the legislation. I've been saying that conciliation rules 1980, I think, put a good framework there. But your mediation, this model law, you've gone, looked at things that have happened over those years, maybe. So that's the kind of process and environment and the atmosphere and the circle that I want to create. And I don't want legislation to come in the picture. Like I said, I trust someone. There is no way the government should be allowed to come into my house and tell me whom I can sit with to resolve my dispute. Because then you are talking about the colonizer coming into your house and looking at things from your end. And I'm saying it becomes so easy for people to accept this, because that colonized mindset has not gone away. How can you even tell someone with either you are not understood the process, which means that we have that education has to happen. You say legislators themselves not being qualified, you've been able to accept that because in the colonizer setup, you don't question the colonizer. So we were easily to accept that. But here, it is all about trust. It is nothing more than that. And if that process happens, we will have more of these people identified, and it will grow as these. I'm saying, let's just look at a child at the age of 8 or 10, and let's look at from that child's perspective, after how many years is that person going to be at a position in a organization, or is anywhere going to be working in organizations in the next 10 years, maybe 15 years. But maybe let's look at it as a 10-15 year project. But when we can do it on a wide scale at the grassroots level, these are the people who are going to move everywhere. That's one thing. Schools is one thing, but in communities, those people are already there. Putting them together is the main thing. So that's the kind of thing I want to do. And legislation for me just has to support this. Should not go against it, because for me, that certification accreditation is a vested interest concept. Training is a vested interest concept. Numbers. I'm just asking 1.4 billion people in India. 1 billion people stay in villages. What are we even saying about training? There was an attempt through this mediation bill, which was put there into parliament. There was an attempt to somewhere get into that. It's a big piece of pie. Huge. I mean, can you imagine the numbers? If you say that, first of all, you want pre-litigation, that's another terminology used. Pre-litigation mediation should happen. You can imagine if there are 18 million matters which go into courts. And of course, you look at it from that perspective, if you want people, which is what I'm going to ask you. How many mediators in relation to disputes or in relation to population do we need? What is your figure there?
Look, this is interesting because that's exactly the question that we sort of try to answer in Peru when we were drafting the conciliation, the compulsory conciliation law. And what they did is they got the number of cases that were the number of applications put in a certain jurisdiction, and then they say, for example, there was 12,000 per day, and then they said, okay, from 12,000, how many are civil cases? They said, okay, around, I don't know, 8,000. From 8,000 cases, if they are all the 8,000 cases per day, 8,000 cases gonna go through conciliations, through the conciliation center. How many conciliators do we need? Then we started talking about how long the conciliation process will be long, because if you have 8,000 per day, let's say you need 8,000 conciliators, at least 8,000 per day, then how many hours each case will last in the conciliation center? Let's say they say we're on approximately 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. Then how many conciliators per center do you need per day? The numbers were so excessive that I said, this is not possible. That's when I advised them not to do it. I said, it cannot be done this way. It's not a mathematical formula, because one case can be 2 hours or another case can be 2 days. You don't know. Depends on the complexity on each case. So you cannot apply mathematical formulas for this. But again, there was, the desire to push this. And then they said, oh, well, then in this case, we need X amount of centers and X amount. Each center can have, 20 conciliators. You multiply it by these hours. I don't believe that this is the right way to go. I don't think mathematical formulas should be applied in this. I already had some issues here with legal aid when there was some initiatives in the government when the Family Law Act was promulgated, and they created these family relationship centers. And very soon, of course, they realized they cannot have a mediation for the full day, because they needed to finish hundreds of cases. So they had only 2 hours. First, it was 3 hours maximum. So your mediation, if you went to these centers, was going to be maximum three hours. And then they limited to 2 hours. And I was critical also about this, because I said, how can you in advance know that this case will be resolved in 2 hours? how is that responsible? You know, some cases need more and some cases, of course, less, but 2 hours for me is just starting to understand uh, what the parties are saying, and the parties are starting to listen to each other, and then you have to finish it. So I don't believe that mathematical formulas or calculations can be done, but just the number that you're mentioning, to me, doesn't make sense to, you know, I mean, I heard also, I read about the lok adalats in your country, where a lot of people are also taking their cases there and being resolved through mediation. And they are successful, you know, big in the sense that they resolve their dispute and the official there, you know, puts a stamp and that's finished. And if it is already happening in other areas, like what you mentioned, the grassroots mediation, not only in India, but in Vietnam is the same thing. And they wanted to, you know, what are we going to do? And I said, well, if it is already working well, why do you want to change it? You know, just leave that. If it is successful, leave it as it is. You know, you only change. I mean, in tennis, you know, you're playing tennis and you're losing, then you have to change your game.
No, but I tell you,
But
you have to be very careful in this, because you mentioned Lok Adalat. You have to understand what's really happening there. First, a person has been frustrated in the judicial system, and that then it goes into a Lok Adalat. He says, whatever I get, at least I'm getting something. Let me finish it off. And
yeah,
if they can reach something, they can. But after that, it's just given to them. Okay, you do this kind of thing, that okay, this is how you resolve it. I'm not going to get into the procedure because I stay away from what's happening in the court system. But we have to be very careful, because statistics, you'll see statistics. Lok adalats are working really well. These are the numbers. These are individuals who make that statistic, the people involved. What did they go through? Why did they settle? And what did they settle at? These things get lost out in statistics because the numbers are too huge to get that. I'm sure feedback could be taken from them, but at that point of time, a person is just saying, okay, I've been able to finish this 10-year-old thing. Let me just get out of it. So I'm just saying that statistics, we have to be very, very careful, because that will go into a different direction. And when you say numbers, like mathematical part, I totally understand. I mean, there's no issue about it, that we can't put it down to numbers. Why I want to get into numbers is because on one end, like you said, anyone can be a mediator, say that they are mediator and no training certified. Well, how about the educators or the trainers? What is that? What is that? How do they say we educate? And educators are more dangerous because they are influencing people's mind. And what that, even the word neutral, I'm saying that in a 40-hour factory, they say the mediator has to be neutral. I've had only that symposium of mine on neutrality and mediation must have been about 18-20 hours. You can debate for 40 hours just neutrality. So it's just, okay, we have to put this out, give it to them, just send them out into the world. My job done. I've got my money. Don't do this to people. These are people who have the passion. You will, first of all, take away their confidence, because you will try to put them into a certain box. This is how you go about it. It's a process which everyone will take into their own way. It's their own personality they will bring in, their spirituality they will bring in, their connection with people they will bring in. Each dispute is going to be unique. The people who are unique, you are unique, you're getting, that combination will never happen in this world again. It's that unique. And I can tell you what you have to do there. You are amazing. If you can do that, I don't think we need anyone else in the world. That's the only people we need. So I think that we have to, so that's why numbers, I put it out only because you don't have any basis to say that this person can be a trainer. What is your basis? That you've done successful mediations, is that your basis? Is that it, that these 4 or 10 or 100 or 1,000, is that the only way disputes happen? Is that the only way that dynamics between people happen? Aren't those billions of people unique? So I'm just saying that I don't think that should have been that. For me, that's why numbers are important to put out to legislators, that you first of all are not qualified or trained or accredited, and this process has nothing to do with anything more than people connecting with this person in whatever way. We don't have words for it also, how that happens. So for that reason, I want to put those numbers out, because we, in countries, that direction that has gone is very dangerous. because of the vested interest of some people that you have to go through this training or this certification through these institutions is creating, like you said, numbers of people being churned out, and it's not helping on the ground. And we are just going into a loop where that that machinery which churns out makes their money, and with that other side, everyone wants to talk about successful mediations. What about the disillusioned people who went to the training? No one talks about those people. Or there's lots that has to happen there, Delcy. But of course, it's limited time. We only had 2 hours. 2 hours is not enough. Definitely.
Yeah, I can see we can have more discussions, and it is important to have these discussions. And I think there's a lot of people out there also with concerns about this. Do we get a perfect system? Do we get a perfect way of facilitating these amicable processes? We human beings are, by nature complex sometimes, and if you are a lawyer, you make things even more complicated. So I think it is not losing sight of what mediation is about.
Yeah.
What
I
it
think
is.
the important thing is that for me, when things are going to change is, one, when people don't connect dispute resolution with courts and lawyers as an exclusive aspect. And the other part of it connected to that is, when I'll take you to court or I'll call the police is not a threat, then we move onwards, because this is all the colonizers doing. I'll take you to court and I'll call the police. It's the colonizers' court and the colonizers' police. Lawyers are the ones that colonizers said, these are the people who will be your lawyers. Because I've had those discussions in indigenous peoples and mediation, and how things between communities were, and the colonizer brought this person in. Now you have to go through this person, and how things changed within communities because of that. So it is there's a lot of history there, a lot of conditioning of the mind that there is. So for me, look, that is a system that I don't want to sit and fight with. So I said, let me work on the ground. That's when Delcy comes in, work on the ground, because I'm saying that there is, although you said that, okay, in Peru communities, and how you were saying that within those communities, but you have to look at the Peru example and experience in relation to these multi-party kind of mediations which happened in relation to those mining projects. Look at the scale of that. That was a person who was what we call a professional mediator, like Luis Ore or Ivan. They've done amazing work there. So in those complex things also, you can bring a person in, and those kinds of, I mean, that's another scale altogether. So, I mean, you have to just think from a larger perspective that, yes, what are we really trying to reach? Where are we trying to reach? And whom are we doing it for? The user. Here it seems we are doing it for training institutions, for the judiciary, lawyers, all these people we are looking at. What about the user? The user got left out somewhere in the picture. We'll come to you later. Let's just have our discussions here in terms of models, facilitative, evaluative, transformative. Users not at all interested. Please, you keep your models to yourself. Come here, help me resolve my dispute. I don't know how you're going to do it. Please do it. No, if you are in Australia, facilitative is mediation. Evaluative is not mediation. That debate by itself, the mediation world will have for the next 10 years. User is sitting there. So lots of work. At what point of time do we say, okay, we say this is the end of this session after 1 minute? I asked you that question about the logo, those 2 circles at the back. What is the significance of those 2 circles that you have on your logo?
It is two the parties coming together. That bit that it is intersecting with each other means that's the areas of agreement. That's when parties get a resolution, when they can finally say, well, we do have our differences, but we do have points in common. And this is when we start talking about how to move forward. How do we find something that accommodates both of us?
But what we haven't done is we haven't taken the listener into account. There's some comments which I'll have to read out. Victor is saying, interesting conversation. I celebrate Delcy for a pioneering work of mediation in Australia. He's in Kenya, but he's from South Sudan, Somalia. We normally put out all these countries for him, but now he's saying in this symposium, he's going to talk about Kenya. Then Mikhail is saying you are both very inspiring colleagues of mediation. And he's also saying business people need to get educated and motivated in what mediation is. Leaving it to lawyers getting paid by the hour the conflict exists to promote it to the parties has not yet and will not work. Then Victor saying I couldn't agree anymore. Mikhail, the business community must make an active stakeholder in discussions. It must be made an active stakeholder in discussions on mediation locally, regionally, and internationally. Okay. And then Mikhail is saying, I was hosting TV shows in Denmark where politicians had to negotiate live with each other and solve issues under time pressure, 20 minutes. And the majority succeeded, even settling issues they had been discussing for years. That's really interesting because I've actually spoken about this in my shows that we should just do it. We have technology at our hand. We have the YouTube. Why should communities not be resolving them? Put it out into YouTube. When I was looking at the Peru example, that there's so many people involved, let them be part of it. Let's not have this, like I said, this advocacy, activism, politics. Few people sit together in closed rooms. We don't know what vested interests are there, what deal making is happening there. Just open it out. We have the technology. That's a very good thing. If that's an example of something like that happening at that scale, I think interesting. So I think your thoughts, your concluding remarks, this can go on for hours. I know that is going to be really interesting, but I think your concluding remarks and whatever Mikhail and all have said, anything that you want to say, please.
Thank you very much, Vikram, and thank you to Mikhail, a friend of mine. Of course, he's done a lot of work in mediation, and all our colleagues who have been so kind and patient to listen to us. I'm sure they all have a lot of contributions also to make in this space. Just my closing remarks is I'm an optimist person, very optimistic about what will happen in the future in mediation. There's a lot of conversations that need to happen. And as you know, important part of a mediation process is the dialogue. You know, it is the space that we can create so everybody can have a say, that everybody can safely state their opinion without, you know, being criticized or judged. And if we facilitate that, I think mediation is in good hands. It's got a good future. I understand the complexities and difficulties of, you know, legislate, not legislate, accredited or not accredited, training, not training. And when you deal with thousands of people, you know, I had some cases of communities impacted. How do you provide the space for them? How do you make sure that you know, thousands of people have the right voice, the right representatives? You know, we're talking even about the language. You know, a lot of the indigenous communities, do they actually have a voice? How do we make sure that they do have a voice in these processes? And, you know, Lucho Ore and Ivan, good friends of mine in Peru, and they have been doing amazing work there. And this is a different type of job. This is a different type of mediation, which I also been very lucky to have performed. You know, crossing rivers and sitting under trees and talking to people, mediating, not in comfortable hotels. You know, this is sometimes when we talk about international mediation, most people will have this idea, oh, you go a fancy hotel and all this. The job that I have done a number of times internationally is actually going to faraway places where not many people want to go, and sit down and, you know, in a muddy place and walk through forests, etc., to reach to the people who actually want to talk to you, and then they need to be listened to. And I think that is what we have to keep in mind, that is mediation. You know, mediation is what you said. It is about the person who have the dispute. not the other actors are important there, but it's about them. It's about how do we as mediators continue with that passion to create that space so people can have the dialogue and have, that amicable resolution, and as a result create more peaceful societies. So I just have to say thank you again, Vikram, for this space and the opportunity, and thank you to everybody, friends and colleagues who have the patience to listen to us. So thanks again.
Lovely thoughts, Delcy. And I'm saying there's lots of work and you have to be part of it. Latin America, we have lots of work. Circles, that's it. Mediation circles at every place. And you have to be part of it. I know you're a busy person. I'll do the work. You'll be there. You'll be there. Moral support. Okay, see you. Delcy, thank you very much. On 19th, we have a workshop. Of course, you've done workshops at the UNCITRAL level for the legislation. Let's just have a discussion based on the discussions we've had on the symposium. Let's see what comes out of it. Thank you very much. Lovely talking to you. And
Thanks.